Dave G. Anderson. Dave graduated in 1982. His parents were Terry, a teacher and principal in the Ely schools for over 30 years, and Sharon Anderson, an artist and substitute teacher for 20 years. Dave also graduated from Vermilion Community College, UMD, and Mississippi State University. He has worked for many years at Northern News Now in Duluth, with his primary career as a broadcast meteorologist. Dave and Linda Klein have 2 children.
So what year did you graduate?
1982, and that's why it's important to say David G. Anderson, because there was a David J. Anderson in the class. And so even from my first day in Kennedy Elementary for kindergarten, I walked into class with my little twins cap on and a Joe's IGA paper bag that said David G. Anderson on it. So there would be no confusion. Confusion that lasted until 1982 as we walked out the other end of the building here with a fresh diploma in hand.
What was it like to be in school in the 1980s? What was the atmosphere?
Well, the atmosphere was very hopeful. The 1980s, that was the sci-fi decade. We had learned from the early 70s that the 1980s were going to be so much more modern. And it kind of seemed like that, at least early on. The cars all of a sudden became smaller and wedgier and with better mileage, and were at least slightly peppier than a lot of 70s cars. My mother had a Ford Pinto. That's what I learned how to drive in. A little 4-cylinder Pinto, and it was slow as a stone. My friend Hans Smith had a Chevette. That would blow the doors off my mother's Pinto, and those aren't known for being fast either. So as the 80s came around, my dad got a hold of a 1980 Oldsmobile. It was like a little mini Cadillac. It was comfortable, it was peppy. Also, if you were a classic rock fan, 1980 was the year disco died, and real rock and roll came back. Billy Joel even rocked in 1980. John Lennon came back from retirement, and that was hopeful. And then that started to fall apart late 1980 when Lennon was assassinated, and then synthesizers started to take over the music scene. And so that one burst of real rock and roll started to fade. So the hope faded just a little bit as well. But bottom line is, it was fun to be in Ely High School in the early 80s.
What was the size of your graduating class?
Let's see, the size of the graduating class of 1982, technically the students was around 120, but only 105 made it. So there were a few that faded away. Some just dropped out. Some came back the next year and finished up. But 105 of us made it. And I remember that because Mr. Scheuer sent out a card after graduation that showed your class rank. And I think I was like 45 out of 105. So at least by the skin of my teeth, I made it into the top half.
Both of your parents were teachers in the Ely school system. What was that like?
Oh, that was a double whammy there because, of course, the kids thought if your dad was the principal, you were getting it easy, but really he was being double hard on you. And, when your mother's the substitute teacher filling in, you can't go, Mom, I don't want to do this. You've got to snap to and follow the orders. So it was a bit of a challenge having parents in the school district and keeping an eye on you.
Did you have a favorite class?
Oh, let's talk about some good classes then. For some reason, I'm scientifically minded, but not mathematically minded. So Mr. Lunsford's geometry class was really tough. That was not easy to get by. I think I only passed barely by trying. There's a little bit of slack that'll cut you for that. But on the other hand, Mr. Mischke's biology class in 10th grade, that was easy. That was concepts I could grasp easily because in biology you don't have to do too much calculus and things like that to come up with how cell mitosis works. Thank goodness for that. And that probably came in handy for becoming a meteorologist eventually. A lot of the lab techniques Mr. Mischke taught me in 10th grade went on to save my bottom in Vermilion Community College with Mr. Dowden's chemistry class. I wasn't able to really quite grab the concepts of chemistry because there's too much of I before E except after C in those chemical rules. And so if it's not straightforward and linear, it's a little hard to grab a hold of. But what saved me in that class was Mr. Mischke's observational skills that he always taught us to write down in lab journals of what you observed and to mark down and write down every little tiny thing you may have observed. And so when Mr. Dowden, all his final was, write down what you learned in this class. I knew right then to write down every little tidbit and filled up the page. And I managed to squeak by that class, all thanks to Mr. Mischke's lab techniques, which I teach to my own students now at Lake Superior College. And other fun classes, I suppose, included speech, of course. Miss Wright was a heck of a taskmaster, but she steered us towards the right direction, so to speak. There's a good one. I think even she would chuckle at that one all these years later. Shop classes were a lot of fun too. Steve Smaker Jr. and Steve Smaker Sr. were a wonderful team of teachers that top shot to us back in the 70s and the 80s. And talk about commanding respect. Old Mr. Smaker might have been getting close to 80 years old when he was teaching us, but even the big tough guys would snap too when he made a command to lay off and obey and straighten up. They listened to him.
So did you feel like you got a good education in Ely?
You know, they always told us in the 70s and early 80s in Ely that when it came to standardized testing, we are always top in the state. And that was something to be proud of. And I think that was all due to the skill of the teachers. They got it into us and we kept it and we retained it. And like you and I mentioned, the ones who were so hardcore tough, when we became adults, then all of a sudden they were nice to us. And that was a little flabbergasting. So I'll tell you the story of Jim Stukel runs a shoe store in Duluth, and that's where I get my shoes because Ely people have to stick together. And I went in there to get a fresh pair of shoes, and there's Rudy Marolt sitting there getting his feet measured. And Mr. Marolt I always thought he was like General Patton. You know, you watched that movie Patton, how tough he was on his troops. Mr. Marolt was tough like that to his students. But now as an adult, he was friendly. Oh, hey, Dave. So what? It was surprising. How come he's not making me drop and give him 20? It was really quite different and unique. And I'm glad I had that chance to meet him before he passed on eventually.
Yeah. Did you have a favorite teacher?
Oh, that is hard to say. In my career at the Ely School District, that spanned from September 1969 to June of 1982, there were very few teachers that were jerks or incompetent. Very few. I can think of maybe 2. All the rest were dedicated and smart and were wonderful people. Sure, they may have been tough, but we needed a little discipline back then. But if I had to pick a favorite, I don't think I could. But I can say that Jim Hogan was a wonderful teacher and one of the inspirations into my journalism crew. I had him for English in 9th grade and 12th grade. And he had a wonderful attitude and a way of teaching that I thought always would have fit a college professor better. But he applied it to us high school students, and I think at least for some of us it worked.
Was there a lot of school spirit? Did you go to sporting events?
Okay, we'll talk about school spirit after I say one more Jim Hogan story. So as I got my career going as a journalist, it was kind of nice to repay the favor and do stories on Jim when he was starting to suffer from, was it MS that he had? And he wasn't moving around so well anymore, but he wanted to ride motorcycles. So they started that annual Jim Hogan motorcycle run where they'd put him in a sidecar on a Harley and tool him around, and he had a great time. And I got a chance to do that story on him and how his friends came together to help one of his dreams come true. And then, of course, I did another story when he passed on eventually, a tribute piece. And in my line of work at Channel 6, sometimes they say behind the scenes, you haven't really died until Dave does your obituary story. And so I was able to do one of those obit stories on Mr. Hogan and just give back to him for what he gave me. And now let's talk about school spirit.
Yeah.
All right, so school spirit, that was a bit of a conundrum because you get into middle school, that's when they start bringing you into the big gym with all the older kids through high school, and they teach you the fight song and the school song and things like that. But you're trying to be cool, so being too enthusiastic about your school can't be cool, can it? So you're trying to fight off being too enthusiastic, even though the internal system in you says, yeah, let's go crazy. I mean, we were proud to be Ely Timberwolves. We were proud of our school. We were competitive in the sports. We did good in the standard testing. Our teachers were 98% really wonderful people, so that shows in your spirit, indeed.
What kind of activities did you participate in school?
All righty. Well, I did a lot of speech team. That, you have to give some credit to John Montgomery, the scoutmaster in Ely back in the day. It was getting time for one of the big blue and gold banquets that we'd have in the basement of the community center. And he needed a piece read to kick off the ceremony. So he lined all of us scouts up, gave us this script, and he made everybody read it. Got to me, I read it. You're our victim, you know. I got to stand up in front of the whole assembly of parents and scouts and read this little piece. That was kind of fun. So that just built into junior high when Reed Mortensen recruited me onto the speech team because I did well in his speech class. And then that led Miss Wright to recruit me into her speech team. So that was one of my big activities, speech team. I usually did the humorous interpretation of prose was the category I did, where we read off a script. But once I became a public speaker, that's what I've got to do every day now as a TV weather person. You know, there's no teleprompter for us. We've got to know what we're talking about and say it semi-smoothly off the top of our heads. And thanks to the skills learned from Reed Mortensen and Linda Wright, I can do that. You know, I tell everybody at this TV station, they come from a lot of different places, and I always tell them, you wonder why Bob Dylan sounds like that? That's because that's the way all Iron Rangers sing. And that's the way I sing too, a 3-note range if I'm lucky, but that didn't stop me from getting into the choir. Early on in elementary school, Darren Streblow was our music teacher. He really loved music, and he instilled a love in music that's with me here today. And the neat thing about Mr. Streblow and the songs he taught us in elementary school, I still know all 50 states in alphabetical order, thanks to that 50 Nifty United States song he taught us back then. And so I couldn't sing very well, but it was still fun to be part of the group. But again, learned a lot about music theory from those music teachers. I tried the band for a while too with Lyle Klein and Bob Nagley, but I was horrible at that. A lot worse than the singing. I played the trombone only because my father had a trombone from his high school days in Tower Sedan. What else did I do? Oh, I was on the highlights team for a while. Did the graphic arts for the Ely highlights for a couple of years, and drawing cartoons, the comic strips for the paper. Jim Hogan was in charge of that. He was the advisor. Other people wrote the news articles. My job was to lay out the headlines and fill all the negative space with clip art and things like that, and draw cartoons. One of the Ely highlights, though, I got in my senior year in the study hall just down the hall, that big double study hall. One of the ancient desks fell over one day, and through the little slit between the top of the desk and the bottom part of the desk, a 1965 copy of the highlights came falling out that somebody must have slipped in there back in 65. And that was fun, interesting reading, because a lot of the teachers were still the same between 65 and 82. Now, the other activity I did in high school, I was on the swim team. So if I'm like the worst singer in the choir, I'm the second slowest swimmer on the swim team. But Coach Edlund was very nice and taught me a lot about swimming, and I did improve. I never got better than second slowest.
What was homecoming like when you were in school?
Oh, homecoming was always exciting because, you know, especially football homecoming was always the most exciting. And the football team in Ely back in the 80s was a great leveler. You know, you've got your cliques, you've got nerds, you've got schoolboys, you've got jocks, you've got burnouts. There was room on the football team for representatives of each of those cliques. So you'd have, you know, the troublemaking hoods out there playing with the straight A students, with the natural jocks, and all coming together and risking life and limb out on that freezing field there, because it's cold in Ely for Friday night football games. A lot of spirit for homecoming, indeed. And, you know, we'd gather in the gym for pep rallies and have little skits and contests. Sometimes they do it out on the football field, sometimes in the Washington Auditorium. We always had a lot of fun.
So was there a homecoming dance? Did you go to, or a prom that you went to?
I think the young lady I took, we were just good friends on the speech team, but she wanted to go, and nobody else was really, well, there were a lot of those friends wanted me to take them. Nobody had true romance in their heart. They just wanted a tall guy to take them to the dance. So there was a little bit of battle for my services, yes, but it didn't end up with anything walking down the aisle, but it was fun. My young date, Stacy, from the speech team, we went to prom. She picked out a nice, and this is the 80s, so the fashion is just horrendous. She's got a yellow dress, and then we went to Mills, and she picked out for me a tan Western-style suit with ruffles and a bolo tie. And of course, being an Iron Ranger, I didn't want to wear no frou-frou. Pardon my English. Miss Gorley's rolling in her grave right now, and I'm messing up my grammar, but didn't want to wear any frou-frou shoes. So I had my neighbor, John Perko's son, Danny, who worked at Reserve, get me a brand new pair of steel-toed Red Wing mining boots. So that's what I wore, clomping along, boom, boom, boom. I was on that kick probably through college, stomping around in mining boots, but that's Ely hot fashion for you. And that's what prom 1982 was like.
So did you work when you were in school in the summer? Or?
Oh, yes. Let's talk about my student jobs. Well, my first job in the media was delivering the Mesabi Daily News back as a 10-year-old in 1974. And I had routes that covered the park area, that neighborhood. We picked up our papers at Peschel's Milk Bar. Peschel's Parkside Milk Bar was the official title for the place, but we always just called it Peschel's, didn't we, back in the day? So that was my first route, and then I had a second route down in the Vermilion Community College era. And then when we moved up into Beacon Hill in the late 70s, I had a route from Boundary Street up towards the Baptist Church, and that neighborhood too. So that was my first job, and that evolved into driving motor route with my dad. My dad was always looking for side jobs because teachers aren't exactly wealthy, and so for a while he was the local distributor for the Manny's Shopper, and of course then I had to have a Manny's route too. Then he took on being the regional manager for the Mesabi Daily News, and then we also drove a motor route, so I got to do that, up the Fernberg, up the Echo Trail, covering all those people with the newspaper. That was one job. That was interesting. But also from 1980 to 82 then, there was a call put out at the end of the school year when I was in 10th grade. They needed about 5 or 6 students, male students, back then. We now know, actually as early as the next year, they opened it up to female students too, but it was kind of sexist that first year. But the call went out for 5 or 6 people to become fill-in janitors because the custodial crew here at Ely District 696, they were mostly World War II vets. Hard drinking, hard fighting, old World War II vets. And to get the school cleaned in 3 months' time, it took them and us to get the job done. And they all were so old that they got 6 weeks of vacation. So there was a 6-week period where it was just us kids doing all the cleaning here. But that was a heck of a job. Like I mentioned, we started with Bill Smuck and John Novak in the kindergarten rooms of the Kennedy building. And we washed everything. We scrubbed the floors, put fresh wax down. Every piece of furniture got washed inside and out. The walls got washed, and even the light bulbs got dusted. And you did that for every classroom, working up the line, stopping in the middle to strip and recoat the gym floors. And by the end of the summer, you were hopefully done here in the memorial building. But that was a really fun job because there are so many catacombs and little nooks and crannies underneath all these buildings, and even in the ceilings above and in the walls, especially this memorial building. You've got secret passageways in between the walls, storage rooms in between the walls of the old media center there and the gym, catacombs under the building. It was fun to crawl through all those and learn shortcuts to go from one building to the other. It was really an interesting job doing that. And then hearing the stories from the old janitors, again, because most of them were World War II vets. Beanie Priatle was the janitor of the Washington School, and Ely people remember Beanie for primarily being the boiler technician at the Lincoln School back in the day. And of course, Beanie was such a kind-hearted man. That was a coal-fired furnace in the Lincoln School. And when kids were gone for Easter break, Beanie would get some kind of rabbit track thing and put it in the coal dust and then make rabbit tracks throughout the lunchroom of the Lincoln School. And the kids got back, he'd point out, look at that, Easter Bunny was here. You guys better go look for some eggs. He was just a sweet man like that.
When you were in high school, did you have a vision of what you wanted to do? Did you know about meteorology and what it was?
I feel I always wanted to have some kind of job in the media. My father had a Super 8 film camera and he shot very well. Someday I'm going to make for cable access all the videos he made of the Ely area from 1970 to 82. He shot a lot of the big events and he had a really good technique. And so you will actually see some of his footage popping up in my news stories. If you saw my recent history piece on the Cold War in Duluth, it had a shot of the Duluth Air Base from 1970. That's what my dad shot at the 1970 air show. His stuff turned out pretty good. That inspired me to be interested in video, and he'd actually let me borrow that camera too, which was really, really cool. That got me interested in video. But getting me interested in audio was Adam Marcinick, George Marcinick's son, math teacher, coach, George Marsnick. His son Adam was in my class. Adam was my very first friend in life too, I think, because when my parents first moved to Ely, we lived in the Trezona house, the old mining captain house on Washington Street. And of course, in that beautiful red house that's still there is where the Marsnicks lived. So I was right across the street from one of my classmates. We've known each other since like the age of 1. But one summer, his dad gave him an old reel-to-reel tape recorder. And so we had fun. Every day we would just ad-lib some kind of radio show, play it back, laugh at it, and then wipe it and do it again the next day. So I don't think any of that exists anymore. But that was fun too. So thanks to Adam and his dad, I got interested in audio. My father taught me about video. Trying to weld the two together was something that got added on to in high school here with people like Mr. Moran, who had some audio and video recording gear in his business classes. Doug Dreschler had classes like that. He taught a drama class in 6th grade, and it had such a cutting-edge piece of technology, a black and white reel-to-reel videotape recorder that we used to record our things that we wrote. And that was a lot of fun to learn how to use that for plays and things like that.
So the meteorology part, tell us about that.
All right. Well, I guess I lived my dream. I got a media job. I went to UMD and studied communications. Once you graduate with a communications degree from UMD, what's the easiest thing to do is get a job at one of the 3 state TV stations. And as an Iron Range Finn, I'll show you, I'll take that job right out of school and I'll run it into the ground for the rest of my life, which I have now been doing for 37 years. So meteorology, where did that come in? I didn't know anything about meteorology. But when I got my job at Channel 6, what's the first job they gave me? You're a young guy, you must know how to use computers. You're going to draw the computer weather maps for meteorologist Jack McKenna, the legend of the weather. I didn't know what I was drawing, but that inspired an interest in the weather. Then Dave Jench, the news director, got this kick in the early 90s that weather people from now on must be real degreed meteorologists. And I was told, go back to school or find something else to do. So, like a good Iron Range Finn, I went back to school, got a degree in meteorology, actually did well in it, and now thanks to that, I'm the longest serving meteorologist in the Northland. By hook or by crook. Yep. You got that Finnish sisu, it sticks with you.
Have you kept in touch with your friends from high school?
A lot of them, yeah. The class of 82 is a fairly tight bunch. We have our own Facebook page. And so I'd say at least 50% of us keep in touch that way. There have been a few, too many, frankly, that I think have already passed on. And there's a few that walked out the door with their diplomas and never came back, never looked back either. But for the most part, yeah, we have our reunion every 10 years. And of course, Steve Smaker's wife, Nancy, from my class, won't let us forget. She and Michelle Zoop and Chris Urbis, Chris Olson back in the school days, they all form a pretty good cabal of keeping everything in order and keeping us all in contact and arranging for wonderful presentations and reunions. And of course, we've done 4 of them now. All 4 of them, they made me be the MC. I'm kind of hoping for the 50th, maybe they'll find someone else. I've told how my stories finally.
So do you get back to Ely often then?
Well, my parents lived in Ely till just recently, so there was always a reason to come back, especially for the holidays. Now that they've passed on, I can still envision coming back to Ely fairly often. I'm only 2 hours away. This is the best place in the world. That rectangle, that golden rectangle from Tower Sedan to Ely, Witten, over to Babbitt and back to Embarrass and up again, that's the best slice of country in the whole world. Why would anybody want to go anywhere else?
What do you like about the city itself?
Ely is the best place to be, and I'm honored to have had roots there. Because this is a neat little town. When I was a kid living on the east end of town over by the Dairy Queen.
So do you have any advice for the kids who are in school today?
My advice to the kids today is, even though you want to be cool, you want to be a little bit rebellious, do it respectfully. Listen to your teachers. They do know what they're talking about. And don't go too crazy, because that'll slow you down later in life. So mind your P's and Q's, play it easy, listen to the teachers, study hard. That one's getting harder and harder to enforce, and everything should go all right for you. And be persistent, be patient, and have sisu, as the Finns would say.